Hello dear students, I'm Vinay M S. I welcome you to this digital learning platform of DCE. In this video lecture, we are going to discuss evolution of tragic form in Reformation England. This is the part of a background study to fifth paper Shakespeare in English optional. The tragic form in Reformation England underwent several stages and it adopted several techniques from different forms. We are going to study that part here in this video. So before going to the video in particular, we need to understand some terms like Renaissance, Reformation in England, or miracle, mystery, and morality place. These terms are important to make a clear perception or understanding of the concept evolution of tragic form in Reformation England. When come to the term Renaissance, ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಪುನರುಜ್ಜೀವನ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೇವೆ. That was a movement that took place in Europe in between 14th and 16th centuries. The major characteristics of the movement was revival of the classical learning. I mean, influence of the classical models. Classical in the sense Greco-Roman culture, Greco-Roman art and architecture. ಇವೆಲ್ಲವುಗಳ right influence on the European models and on the English models. So you see a borrowing from the classical Greco-Roman, Greek and Roman, even Latin that happened in the process of Renaissance. So the learning revived in the period of Renaissance, and then we see along with that there happened a process called Reformation. That was a religious something related to the church, because in the process of Reformation in England, the Church of England broke away from the authority of the popes or the Roman Catholic Church. That particularly happened in 1534 under the rule of the King Henry VIII. So these two things are important because they have their influence on the later development of this tragic form as a literary form. Even before that, we see there were three words related to plays in English. Natakagalu andaga morality plays, miracle plays, and mystery plays. We have to understand this because mystery plays are related to the performance of the biblical incidents. Bible na storyಗಳನ್ನ ಆಧರಿಸಿ ನಾಟಕಗಳನ್ನು in order to give preachings to the people, ಜನರಿಗೆ ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಬೋಧನೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಡುವ ಒಂದು ಅಂಗವಾಗಿ ಚರ್ಚಿನ ಭಾಗವಾಗಿ ನಡೀತಾ ಇತ್ತು ಮಿಸ್ಟರಿ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್. And then we see a later development miracle plays. Their stories of the saints ಏನಿದ್ರು ಅವರುಗಳ ಜೀವನ ಕುರಿತಾದಂಥ the miracles happened in their life. They were portrayed through those plays. And in the meantime, even before that, we had one morality plays. These are allegorical plays. ಮನುಷ್ಯನ ಗುಣಗಳನ್ನೇ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಗಳಾಗಿ ತೋರಿಸುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ದ ಫೇಮಸ್ ಒನ್ ಈಸ್ ಎವ್ರಿ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ ಈಸ್ ಎ ಮೊರಾಲಿಟಿ ಪ್ಲೇ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬನನ್ನು ಆ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ನ ಮೂಲಕ ತೋರಿಸೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ತೇವೆ, ರೈಟ್? ಹೀಗೆ ಇವೆಲ್ಲವೂ ಮೊದಲು ಇದ್ದಂತಹ ನಾಟಕಗಳು. ದೇ ವರ್ ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಸೇಕ್ರೆಡ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಸೆನ್ಸ್ ದೇ ವರ್ ರಿಲೇಟೆಡ್ ಟು ರಿಲಿಜಿಯಸ್ ಆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್. They have something to do with the Bible, have something to do with the church. So that was the thing. With the revival of the new learning and the influence of the Greco-Roman art, architecture, culture, and the attitude towards these literature or even plays changed, and a new wave brought in. That resulted in the concepts tragedy, comedy, and tragic comedy. Among these three, we see the first development is of comedy, and then the tragedies, and finally tragic comedies. Today we are discussing evolution of tragic form. When come to the term tragedy, you know that as Aristotle defines in his definition, classical idea or theory of tragedy is an imitation of a serious action, right? It's an imitation of a serious action where of certain magnitude, that means of some noble quality, or it includes some kind of noble idea, where you find a noble character who goes to the zenith of his achievement and he falls there from that zenith to a very low state. And that creates an idea called catharsis, that is the purification or purgation of emotions. ಅಂದರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಟ್ರಾಜಿಡಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು, ಒಂದು ಉತ್ತಮವಾದ ಕಥೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಹೀರೋ ಕಲ್ಪನೆಯನ್ನು ನಾವು ಪಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇವೆ. ಆತನ ಉನ್ನತಿಯನ್ನು ತಲುಪುವಾಗ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಕೊರತೆಯಿಂದ ಅವನು ಬೀಳ್ತಾನೆ. ಆ ಬಿದ್ದಂತ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅವನು ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಿನ್ನಡೆಯನ್ನು ಅನುಭವಿಸ್ತಾನೆ. ಆ ಬಿದ್ದಂತಹ ಸಂದರ್ಭ ಏನಿರುತ್ತೆ ಅದು ಅವನ ಜೀವನದ ಅಂತ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರಣವಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಯು ಸಿ, ಅನ್ಲೈಕ್ ಕಾಮಿಡೀಸ್, ದ ಡಿನೋಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು, ಆ ನಾಟಕದ ಅಂತ್ಯ ಟ್ರಾಜಿಡಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಯೂಶುವಲಿ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್ಸ್ ಥ್ರೂ ದ ಸಾರೋ ಆರ್ ಡೆತ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಹೀರೋ ಆರ್ ಡೆತ್ ಆಫ್ ಸಮ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್. This is what the basic idea of tragedy. Let's move on to evolution of tragic form in English context, in Reformation England. So when we come to this evolution of tragic form, there are three main stages of early English tragedy. The first one is imitation of the Senecan model. Then the other one is, again, we can identify the imitation of the classical model and blending them together. Ideas borrowed from the Senecan model and ideas borrowed from the classical model are blended together into make the English model, the English tragedy in 15th, 16th centuries, 16th centuries in particular, right? So then we see what is that influence or contribution from Senecan tragedy to English tragedy in its evolution. So we see there are so many elements which are borrowed from Seneca, the Spanish philosopher, who wrote about 9 plays. Those plays were closet dramas. That means they were meant for only reading. They were never performed, in fact. But the English theatre, the English dramatists borrowed ideas from Seneca and they implemented it to into stage. That means they wrote plays adopting his ideas and they enacted it on the stage also. See, some features, basic features of Senecan model influence the English play. The first one is, you see, abundance of melodrama. You see a lot of sensational incidents. Creating, appealing to the strong feelings of the audience is the main thing that you notice in Senecan plays. So for doing that, what do? They bring a lot of incidents of death, battles, fight. So all these things, emotional, right, that can create emotions among the audience. That kind of incidents are used a lot in the play. You can see that in later in English play also, that is borrowed from Senecan model. We also see another technique of writing. I mean, when come to the composition of lines, they followed blank verse. It is borrowed from Seneca. Seneca used blank verse. Blank verse is a form of poetry which doesn't follow rhyming structure. Okay, so we see in blank verse, of course, they use ಎಂಬೆ ಪೆಂಟಾಮೀಟರ್, 5 ಫೂಟ್ಗಳ ಒಂದು ಲೈನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಪೆಂಟಾಮೀಟರ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಅದನ್ನ ಬಳಸಿಯೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಬಟ್ ಅಟ್ ದ ಎಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಎವ್ರಿ ಲೈನ್ ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ನೋ ವರ್ಸ್, ಲೈಕ್ ದ ಟ್ವಿಂಕಲ್ ಟ್ವಿಂಕಲ್ ಲಿಟಲ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್, ಹೌ ಐ ವಂಡರ್ what you are and star. This is rhyming. This rhyming is never followed. That's a popular nursery rhyme, right? So that kind of rhyming is not followed in blank verse. Okay, so blank verse was the popular form brought from Senecan model. And then we see 5-act plot. So in the Senecan model, he followed 5-act plot. And this 5-act plot was adopted even by Shakespeare, popularly in the Elizabethan theatre or in the Renaissance England. Okay, then we see occasional chorus. In between the play, we see occasional chorus, singing, ಹಾಡುಗಳನ್ನು ಗುಂಪಿನ ಹಾಡುಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ತೇವೆ. And stock of characters, not just 1 or 2 or 4, 5 or limited number of characters. A number of characters appear over the stage and stock of characters. Also we see stock means variety also, right? Variety of characters are seen there, right? Anyhow, exaggerated passions is another important feature of Senecan model that was borrowed to here. Passions, the feelings, emotions are exaggerated to the highest level. Then crude emotions. That's another thing. Crude emotions. Crude means, you know about the word crude oil in petroleum context, right? Crude means raw. That is not filtered. I mean, not refined. Refined Allah. Unrefined. not very standard, of the certain standard, antaha emotions. For example, scenes of murder everywhere, so are bringing bloodshed in the stage. These are crude emotions. These things are used, and exuberant rhetoric. These plays adopted exuberant rhetoric, ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ, ಲೈನ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೇವೆ. You can see that in Shakespeare's universal lines. For example, you see how Mark Antony in Julius Caesar makes the audience change their mind just by giving one address, right? So that kind of exuberant rhetoric was seen in the plays. Yeah, all these features are taken from Senecan tragedy into English tragedy. So therefore, the first imitation, the first stage here is imitation of the Senecan model. When we move on to the other one, that is the classical tragedies, or the contribution of classical tragedy in the evolution of English tragedy, or how classical tragedy influenced it. The word classical, as already I told you in the beginning, is clear for you that it is from Greek, Roman, Greek, Latin, right? Greek drama that influenced a lot to English tragedy. So when come to the concept Greek drama, we know the great playwrights of the Greek, like Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides. Euripides is a comedian, but Aeschylus and Sophocles, their plays are taken as model by Aristotle. Aristotle, composed his great definition of tragedy and his concepts of tragedy through the model of Sophocles, especially Oedipus the Rex, right? Oedipus the king. So here we observe classical idea of Aristotle or Greek tragedy is followed in the English tragedy. Let's see what are they. You see some concepts of classical tragedy like hamartia, peripetia, anagnarsis, catharsis. These are the technical words used by Aristotle. Hamartia is a tragic flaw, right? Where the play opens with a grand description, and the hero who is a noble character who has one weakness, that is tragic flaw, weakness of the hero, tragic flaw, hamartia, right? And peripetia, then later on we see peripetia is because of that weakness we see a reversal of fortune, fall in the fortune, reversal, ಅವನ ಅದೃಷ್ಟ ದುರದೃಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗುವ ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶ peripetia. And then when the reversal of fortune takes place in that state, he makes an anagnosis or recognition of his flaw, error, ತನ್ನ ತಪ್ಪೇನು ಎನ್ನುವ ಅರಿವನ್ನು ಅವನು ಗುರುತಿಸ್ತಾನೆ. ಆಗ there happens catharsis. Catharsis for whom? Audience. ನಮಗೆ, ನಾವು ನೋಡುವವರಿಗೆ ಏನಾಗ್ತದೆ, ಅವನ ದುಃಖ ಏನಿದೆ, ಅವನ ತಪ್ಪನ್ನು ಅವನು ಗುರುತಿಸಿ ಅವನು ಅನುಭವಿಸುವ ನೋವು ಏನಿದೆ, ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ನೋವನ್ನು ನಾವು ನೋಡಿಕೊಂಡು ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾವನೆಗಳನ್ನು ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇವೆ, ದುಃಖಗಳನ್ನು ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೇವೆ ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಕಲ್ಪನೆ. ಪರ್ಗೇಷನ್ ಆರ್ ಪ್ಯೂರಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್ ಆಫ್ ಎಮೋಷನ್ಸ್ ಈಸ್ ಕೆಥಾರ್ಸಿಸ್. ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ಅಂಶ ನೀವು ಇಡಿಪಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ಬೋದು. ಇಡಿಪಸ್ ಅವನು ದೊಡ್ಡ ರಾಜ, ಅವನಿಗೆ ಆಕ್ಚುಲಿ ಅವನ ಹಿನ್ನೆಲೆಯನ್ನು ನೋಡಿದರೆ ಕಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಾರಿಂತ್, ರೈಟ್? ಅಲ್ಲಿಯ ಒಬ್ಬ ಮಗುವಾಗಿದ್ದು ಅವನನ್ನು ಬೇರೆ ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಆ ರಾಜ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಾನೆ. ಅವನು ಪಕ್ಕದ ರಾಜ್ಯದ ರಾಜನಾಗಿ ಬಂದು ತನ್ನ ತಂದೆಯೊಂದಿಗೆ ಯುದ್ಧ ಮಾಡಿ ಅವನಿಗೆ ತನ್ನ ತಂದೆ ಎಂದು ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ರೈಟ್? ಅದು ಅವನ ಟ್ರಾಜಿಕ್ ಪ್ಲಾ. ಸೊ ಮತ್ತೆ ಏನಾಗ್ತದೆ, ನೀವು ಆ ಸ್ಟೋರಿಯನ್ನು ಒಮ್ಮೆ ನೋಡ್ಬೋದು. ಇಡಿಪಸ್ ದ ಕಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಕಲೋನಸ್ ಅಂತ ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಆ ಯುದ್ಧದ ನಂತರ ಎಲ್ಲ ಪದ್ಧತಿಯಂತೆ ತನ್ನ ಎನಿಮಿಯ ಹೆಂಡತಿಯನ್ನು ಅವನು ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮದುವೆ ಆಗಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಇಡಿಪಸ್ಗೆ ಅವನ ಸೋಲಿಸಿದ ಅವನ ತಂದೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅವನ ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಅವನ ತಾಯಿಯೇ ಅವನ ಹೆಂಡತಿಯಾಗಿ ಬರುವ ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಅದು ತಿಳಿದಾಗ ಅವನು ತನ್ನ ಕಣ್ಣುಗಳನ್ನು ಕಿತ್ತುಕೊಂಡು ಅಲಿಯುವ ಒಂದು ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶವನ್ನು ನಾವು ಇಡಿಪಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಸೊ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಹೆಮಾರ್ಷಿಯಾ, ಪೆರಿಪೆಟಿಯಾ, ಅನಗ್ನಾಸಿಸ್, ಕೆಥಾರ್ಸಿಸ್ ಅನ್ನು ಅಬ್ಸರ್ವ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೇವೆ. ಈ ಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿಗಳನ್ನು ಟ್ರಾಜಿಕ್ ಡ್ರಾಮಾ, ಟ್ರಾಜಿಡಿ, ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಟ್ರಾಜಿಡಿ ತಗೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಡೆವಲಪ್ ಆಗೋದನ್ನು ನಾವು ನೋಡ್ತೇವೆ. ದೆನ್ ವಿ ಸಿ ದ ನೋಷನ್ ಆಫ್ 3 unities. The unity of place, time and unity of action. ಇವು 3. ಯೂನಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಅಂದ್ರೇನು? ಈಗ ಒಂದು ನಾಟಕವನ್ನು ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ತೋರಿಸಿ ಇಮಿಡಿಯೇಟ್ಲಿ ಅಮೆರಿಕಕ್ಕೆ ಶಿಫ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ರೈಟ್? ಸೊ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಯೂನಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಆಕ್ಷನ್. ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಹೊರಟೋಗುತ್ತೆ. ಟೈಮ್ ಕೂಡ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಇವತ್ತು ಒಂದು ಪ್ಲೇಯನ್ನು ನಾನು ಸೆಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು 100 ವರ್ಷ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಪ್ಲೇಯನ್ನು ಸೆಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ವಾಟ್ ಯೂನಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಟೈಮ್. So similarly we have unity of action. Unity of action is when one play is taking place in one place, that should lead to the other. So all the three unities are followed in the English theatre based on the classical model. Likewise, these are some important aspects of classical tragedy that influenced English model. When come to the English model, the development of the English model, it blended both Senecan and the classical model. The ideas from the Senecan model are mingled with the classical model and added some new qualities also and developed the great English tragic tradition. So we see that through these points here, preference to physical realism, that wasn't there very much in those two models, but English tragedy gave preference to somewhat physical realism, something related to the age. ರೈಟ್, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವತ್ತಿನ ದಿನಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟದನ್ನ ಮೇ ಬಿ ಎಲಿಜಬೆತನ್ ಏಜ್ ಅದಾಗಿತ್ತು ಅಲ್ವಾ, ಆ ಎಲಿಜಬೆತನ್ ಕಾಲದ ಜನರ ಭಾವನೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದಂಥ ಅಂಶಗಳನ್ನ ಕೊಡೋ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ. ಅಂಡ್ ವಿ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಸಿ ಕಂಬೈನಿಂಗ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ವಿತ್ ದ ಮೋರಲ್ಸ್. ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ವಾಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಅಟ್ ಆಲ್ ರೆಫರ್ಡ್, ರೈಟ್, ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ನೀವು ಅಬ್ಸರ್ವೇಷನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಈಗ ಬೆಸ್ಟ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಫಾರ್ ಸೆನೆಕನ್ ಮಾಡೆಲ್ ಇಸ್ ಥಾಮಸ್ ಕಿಟ್ಸ್ ದ ಸ್ಪ್ಯಾನಿಷ್ ಟ್ರಾಜಿಡಿ ಅಂತ ಇದೆ, ಅಥವಾ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಗಾರ್ಬಡಕ್ ದ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಪ್ಲೇ, ರೈಟ್. So English tragedy, and the first English tragedy is Godbudder. Ivellavvu kade now history has nothing to do with that, okay. So but when come to the Shakespeare's plays like Henry series irbodu, or even Richard series, all these, they brought the stories from the history and gave some moral through the play. The combining history with the moral was another thing. And patriotism and national themes, it was the era of the Queen Elizabeth. People had that quality of individualism, humanism, ಇವೆಲ್ಲವೂ ಕೂಡ ಹುಟ್ಟಿದಂಥ ಒಂದು ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶ ಅದಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರ ಪ್ರೇಮ ಹೆಚ್ಚುತ್ತಾ ಇರುವಂಥ ದಿನ ಆಗಿತ್ತು. ಸೊ the English plays particularly brought that patriotism, utilized that feeling, the playwrights exploited that feeling of patriotism of the audience, and they used that in their plays. And we also observe another thing, the earlier miracle and morality play tradition continued. I mean, some of those morals, some of those messages continue to appear in the play, but they are also given the touch of humanity. And also the melodramatic scenes of Senecan plays, they got some humanity also, right. Of course, in Seneca also, he never showed that murder or horrible scenes on the stage. Instead, he used a messenger to report those things on the stage. But here we observe they sometimes showed it on the stage, but they also had certain humane feelings there. They filled human feelings. Like you see great tragedies like Romeo and Juliet. There the love, the quality of love is highlighted. So human feelings are given a lot of emphasis, right? So the development of the English tragedy in Reformation England borrowed things from both Senecan model as well as classical model and developed into a popular form of literature. Finally, we can also see that this English tragedy explored its own quality instead of just a mere imitation of the earlier models. Along with those imitations of the models, they found their own individuality, and that's what later made English tragedy of Reformation England, that is 16th century England, a greatest period of tragedy in English literature. Thank you for watching. We will discuss